Okay, so we're continuing kind of sort of with the nervous system, but this time we're going to get into the senses and talk about how do we sense things, how do we integrate that to pull it together, and then how do we generate a motor response. So we're going to get involved with the components of the somatic nervous system, talk about the structures of the general and the special senses, talk about how the regions of the central nervous system contribute to the somatic functions, what is the stimulus response motor pathway, and then look at what the reflex arc is on a basic level, and then talk about some of the different types of reflexes. So we're going to start with touch, taste, and smell for this video. Next video we'll go over the other ones. But let's get into touch, taste, and smell. So we'll talk about some of the different types of sensory receptors. We'll talk about somatosensory receptors, and then gross and microscopic structures involved with the special senses, which would be taste and smell in this case. So before we get deep into the woods here, let's at least talk about different types of sensory receptors, because we can classify them in a lot of different ways. We can classify them based on their cell type. So is it a free nerve ending? Is that nerve ending encapsulated? Is it a receptor cell, right? So these different things, like just based on cell type, we can have different classifications there. We can also classify them based on their location. Are they an exteroreceptor, which is detecting stimulus from an outside of the body? Is it an interoreceptor, which is detecting changes within the body? Or is it a proprioceptor, which is helping you maintain balance, right? Helping you maintain posture and understanding your place in the world. Like, are you upside down? Like, things like that. Like, where are you facing? Are you moving? Things like that. And then functional classification is based on the type of the stimuli that the sensory receptor can respond to. So is it a chemoreceptor, meaning we're responding to a certain chemical? Is it an osmoreceptor? Are we responding to changes in water salt balance? Is it a nociceptor, which is for pain, right? Pain receptors. Or is it a mechanoreceptor, which detects like mechanical changes, so pressure, right? Things like that. And then thermoreceptor, which is going to detect changes in temperature. So here's a classification we can do by cell type. So all of these are, different neurons, different receptors. In this case, we have one with free endings, so it's like out in the open, versus the encapsulated. We see that there is something covering over those dendrites. Or if we're highly specialized, right, like this one or in this case, we're looking at a rod, which is involved in vision, right? We are highly specialized for that specific task. So for our first one, let's get into somatosensation, which is our sense of touch. This is a general sense and encapsulates a lot of different things, right? It involves a sensation of pressure, right? Is someone lightly touching you, or are they pressing in? Vibration, right? If something's moving over you, is there any sort of shakiness, right, to that feeling? Or like movement to that touch. Light touch, right? Think like if something's just barely coming over, like maybe just touching the hairs, right, from your skin. Which comes into like tickle, right? Is something tickling you? Is it making you just like that uncomfortable versus pain, right? Pain is another sensation with touch. Itch, if something's itching you, so imagine like a little bug crawling over you, right? It makes that itchy feeling that you have to swat it away or scratch it. You can tell difference in temperature. Is that water hot or cold, right? Kinesthesia, something moving, right? Are you moving? And then proprioception, which again is your sense of space, your sense of where you're facing, are you like how you're oriented. And then these receptors, they're all over the place, right? We see these receptors all throughout the body. We see them in all different organs. We see them in the skin. We see them in muscles. We see them in tendons and ligaments and joint capsules. We even see them in the walls of the visceral organs that are deeper in. So these guys are everywhere. But we're probably at least most familiar with the ones that are in our skin, because those are the first ones that jump out at you when you think touch. So we're going to talk about just some of these. So we're generally looking at mechanoreceptors when we look at sense of touch. So we have like free nerve endings. These are good for things like temperature, pain, or mechanical deformation. So if something's like pushing in, right, on you. The Merkel's discs or Merkel cells, these are going to be in like right where the epidermis and dermis come together. This is going to be for low frequency vibration. We have the bulbous corpuscle. This is in the dermis and joint capsules for stretching. Right, so you think when you stretch, right, if you stretch a joint too far, you can tell, right? The tactile or the Meissner's corpuscle. This is in the dermis, especially we think fingertips and lips, and this is for light touch, right, and vibrations. The lamellated corpuscle, this is deeper in the dermis. This is for deep pressure and high frequency vibration. And then in the hair follicle plexus, right, these are going to be wrapped around the hair follicles. This is for the movement of the hair. So like again, if something crawls like across your arm and it's only on the hair, you still feel it, right? You can still tell even though the hair itself doesn't feel anything. But the movement of the hair, right, that's going to trigger the hair follicle plexus. The muscle spindles, this is found within the skeletal muscle fibers. This tells us about muscle contraction and stretch, so you can feel that, right? And then tendon stretch organs, or the Golgi tendon, this is going to be found with the tendons, and it's going to detect the stretch of a tendon. When it comes to our sense of taste, we also call this gustation. This is a special sense. There are raised bumps on your tongue called papillae, right? So, and these are going to have the structures that are involved with you being able to taste, or what we call gustatory transduction. And there are 4 different types of papillae based on appearance. So again, this is not based on what they taste. This is based on the shape, right? This is based on the appearance of the papillae. But we have the circumvallate, the foliate, the filiform, and the fungiform papillae. Right? And then within these papillae, we find the taste buds, and the taste buds are the ones that actually have the gustatory receptor cells, which are the ones that actually detect the chemicals in the food that you eat, right? So this is what taste. They're detecting specific chemicals to give you the sense of taste. So here are the different types of papilla. Again, this is just shape, so circumvallate, right? We see like it's like a ring with it on the inside. We have the fungiform right here. We have the filiform, and we have the folate, right? We see it in different spots, right, on the tongue. Like we see the circumvallate's kind of towards the back, and filiform's towards the front, fungiform's kind of in the middle, and then foliate's kind of like on the edge. And you may have heard about like the map of the tongue in terms of what you taste, and like, oh, this part of the tongue is for sweet and this part's for savory. Take that and throw it in the garbage, right? There is a map in terms of the shapes of the papillae, but in terms of what tastes we get, there is no legitimate map telling us this part of your tongue can only taste sour. So that whole map idea where like there's certain regions that only taste that, take that, throw it in the garbage. That's not how that works. There are certain areas of the tongue that are more sensitive to taste than others, but that's like usually at the tip of the tongue. But again, there's no specialized sections that only taste sour or only taste sweet, right? It's also important to note too that when it comes to your sense of taste, it really comes down to only 5 different things. Your sense of taste can taste sweet, savory, also called umami, sour, bitter, and salty. So they're just detecting, like with salty, they're detecting sodium, right? With sweet, we're detecting carbohydrates like sugars, right? With umami, we're tasting proteins, right? So our sense of taste is relatively limited compared to the next one, which is our sense of smell. Our sense of smell is going to be much more direct, much more nuanced. This is another special sense. We have olfactory receptor neurons that are unipolar. These are located in the olfactory epithelium, and they're going to respond to chemical stimuli as well when it comes into the nasal cavity. So little chemical particles, when they come into your nasal cavity, can bind to these receptor neurons to give you a picture of like, what are you smelling? So this is more specific So like our sense of taste, we have like the 5 basic categories, but when it comes to olfactory receptors, we're looking at like more than like 400 olfactory receptors to detect odors. So major difference in terms of the complexity of what we can taste and taste itself versus combining it with smell. So the dendrites they're actually gonna come through the apical surface of the epithelium into the mucus lining in the cavity, and then the receptors for the odorants are there. This is going to come through the cribriform plate in the ethmoid bone to reach the olfactory bulb, which is then going to join and form with the olfactory nerve, which is our first cranial nerve. Once we cross into the central nervous system, the olfactory nerve becomes the olfactory tract. Remember, nerve and tract are the same thing, just we're talking about different locations, so peripheral versus cranial or versus central. And the axons get sent to several different brain regions. These axons do not synapse into the thalamus, which is different from the other special senses that we have. So if we look at this guy here, is smelling a cup of coffee, right? It's morning, first thing in the morning you want to do, right? So air is inhaled, right? Taking that deep whiff of that coffee smell. It's circulated through the nasal conchae, and at the very top there of the nasal cavity, we have the olfactory tract, the olfactory bulb, and the olfactory epithelium extending downward. And so here we see like it's actually coming through like little openings in the ethmoid bone, right, in that cribriform plate, branching down through the basal lamina, through the olfactory epithelium, and then this is like on the inside of that nasal cavity, right? And so we see these cells, these olfactory receptor neurons are actually they have like little tendrils coming out, mixed in with that olfactory epithelium.